Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Taming the App Zoo, Managing Your Menagerie at the Edge. It's an interesting title. Lots of M's in there. Today I'm joined by Paul from Futurum Group. Did I say that right?
You did, yeah. Futurum Group, yep.
Okay, cool. I mispronounce ZEDEDA all the time, so apologies if I mispronounce your group. But Paul, can you introduce yourself and tell us what your group does?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today. So Paul Nashawaty, I'm the practice lead for the app dev business unit at the Futurum Group, and we focus on, well, my practice focuses on day zero, day one, day two. So build, release, and operation. So the edge, the applications in the space really fall nicely into my practice.
Got it. Okay, cool. And how big is the Futurum Group?
Oh, we're a fairly large organization. We've grown quite a bit over the last year. We have 14 practices around the analyst firm, around the analyst side. We have a media arm. We focus on the media side, as well as our intelligence forum as well, our portal there for our data and our intelligence. So we have a full-rounded primary and advisory services research firm.
Cool. Nice. Excellent. Well, thanks for joining. For those that don't know me, I should say, I'm Maxey. I'm the VP of Business Development here at ZEDEDA. And today we're going to talk about sort of apps at the edge and what we're seeing from customers and how that's evolving over time. But, I like to sort of equate it to something we can all relate to, which is cloud computing. We've all sort of lived through, that wave and that storm of how it's really changed development and apps and, really businesses in general. So I like to try and equate edge to cloud and I know that you've recently done a bunch of research around, application development and release speeds and can you share a little bit about like what your end users are saying around application development?
Oh, absolutely, Maxie. Yeah, that's a great question. When we talk about application development, the first thing that comes up most frequently with CIOs is their top concern is application modernization. They have to look at it in the context of the past, present, future, heritage applications moving to the current state, and then looking into the future of where they're going. A lot of those challenges organizations run into that we see in our research is skill gap issues and complexity and portability of applications across different locations and just and so on. There's a number of different areas that organizations are looking at, but our research encompasses the adoption of that microservices and containerization, as well as using Kubernetes, as well as what's happening at the individual locations as well. So there's a lot happening there, but we can double click down on each area as well in this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think, companies need to think about a trade-off between like simplicity and fast versus portability, right? Because simplicity and fast in the cloud comes with all the embedded services. Amazon, Azure, Google, they've all built, hundreds of different services, be it database or firewalls, what be it. And using those lets you go really fast, but using those also can start to limit portability. What's your take on that? Like, is that a reality CIOs are facing, and what are they thinking around that?
Yeah, many organizations are dealing with that same struggle. So what we find in our research is 96% of organizations are using two or more clouds. 65% are using four or more clouds. And what that means is they're not using a single cloud provider. So they need to have that way to harmonize the application across different locations, about different cloud locations, and to find that resource, the skill set to that knows GCP and AWS and Azure. That's a unicorn, right? It's really something that's really hard to find. So having the ability to do that is really critical to a lot of organizations. In fact, what we see in our research is 88% of new production workloads are being developed in the cloud. Okay. But 20% of the respondents to our survey indicated that application portability is critical to their business. 67% said it was very important to them. So if you look at it from that perspective, there has to be a way to harmonize those applications across the different tech stacks, as well as different locations in order to process the information appropriately.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think when we started as a company, that was certainly a trend that we believed would happen, which was like, all modern applications are developed in a cloud-like way, using containers, using services underneath. we went from 12 factor to cloud native, but fundamentally we sort of refactors apps over the last 20 years. And we sort of saw that coming to the edge as well, right? 7 years ago, the edge was really bespoke stacks for IoT stacks that ran one application, and you set it for 10 years and you replace it 10 years later, and maybe you update it once or twice over that 10-year period. And that's not app portability, that's not cloud at all. So early on, we sort of recognized that trend and sort of brought that together, and we're delivering a lot of that for our customers today. So portability is a big one. I think the other is sort of how fast these applications are coming, right? I think we've trained a whole generation of developers that like everything is on demand and ready to go. I remember the days when you submitted a Jira ticket after getting weeks of approvals to stand up a database, and you would wait 2 to 3 weeks for the Oracle guys to stand up a database in the enterprise. These are weeks and months to sort of stand up an application. And I know you've done some research here, but like the pace of apps is accelerating. What are you seeing?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. The luxury of waiting to submit a ticket and waiting 3 to 4 days for something to happen, those days are long gone. We're seeing in our research that it's incredibly important to streamline the CI/CD pipeline to make sure that applications are being created very rapidly. I'll say that in the survey that I found that 24% of respondents to our survey indicated they want to release code on an hourly basis, but yet only 8% of organizations are able to do so. And part of the reason is because they're dealt with challenges and complexity, and also they don't have the platforms that enable them to move faster. Maxey, you touched on the fact that applications are being developed faster and such. What we're also seeing is 2 to 3 times more applications are being created today than there were just a few years ago, with half or a fraction of the resources to deliver them. But when we look towards the future, the only way organizations can adapt that way of creating those applications is to use some type of automation and AI. And that includes at the edge and in all locations, but at the edge in particular. In order to modernize and move faster, you have to have the ability to be agile and adapt as needed.
Yeah, no, hourlies, that's insane. I remember when 2 week sprints were like, what? You're insane. But hourly releases, yeah, that's not the edge. We see a mix of sort of, I mean, we certainly see lots of applications, to your point, like lots of new applications being built and startups bringing tons of value to the edge ecosystem and lots of deployments in there. But there's also sort of a big OT presence or operational technology presence, and at least in our customer base. And there it's the other end of the spectrum. It's like, hey, it's not broken, don't touch it. You need 15 levels of approval to do an update. We're not going to flash a new Windows image until we have to. We bump into customers that are running Windows NT or Windows 7 because it works. And, if the line goes down or you stop producing oil, like it's a significant event. And, there's different sort of paces in there. So it's pretty interesting. Like the cloud is at this point where it's hourly, and, I think the edge will get there. But today it's a little bit slower. I think the fast things are probably like firewall rules and, those types of things that need to be periodically updated, but not hourly. And then there's the apps that, have been there forever. Like, in fact, what I would say is sort of a common stack we see on the edge is, something old. And I use that term, think of a virtual machine running an old Windows release that's connected to a robot, right? And they may refactor that to containers one day, but fundamentally probably not. Like it runs well, it connects to legacy equipment, but that's a really powerful data source that's sort of throwing all this local data process on the edge into a compute to produce value out of it, right? And I know you talk a lot about sort of application portability. On the edge, that's obviously critical. Can you get the app there? But why is it there? And I think, you guys have done a bunch of work around data and AI at the edge. So, I think we're seeing that overlap in our customer base. But I'm curious sort of your take on, data management at the edge and what your customers what your the enterprises you talk to are asking for.
Yeah, Max, it's a great question. I like to unpack what you said in a couple of different ways. There's a couple of things to kind of think about, and you touched on it very specifically, and I like what you said. There is a past, present, future kind of approach here with application modernization. Not everything needs to be refactored, right? Plain and simple. And frankly, that's music to CIOs' ears because they don't have to put resources behind refactoring everything. And when you look at applications and if refactoring it to a cloud native state, it doesn't provide you any gain, why spend the dollars to do that? You don't need to, right? So, but you can have your encapsulated heritage application into a VM and be in the cloud as cloud ready in in an edge location. You can absolutely have that still that portability. So I like to talk about applications that live within this maturity model of
Mhm.
5 different stages, right? You have your heritage siloed applications on one side, and you have your fully cloud native elastics, application on the other. And there's 5 stages along the way, which includes virtualization, includes fat containers, includes microservices and containerization and Kubernetes orchestration. But it really depends on the business need to drive those results. And so when you look at that, applications can live in any one of those stages. But what's incredibly important, especially when you brought up the term, you brought up AI, right? What's incredibly important is to have actionable insights to the information where it lives. So processing data in place is incredibly important. You can't move these large data sets around. I mean, if you're a warehouse at the edge and you're processing a lot of data, you're not going to move petabytes of data back to the core data center to get. It's not going to happen. You're going to process that information in place. And then you're going to use that information. But to your point, there's an alignment or bridging the gap, so to speak, between the old and new, right? There
Yep.
has to be utilizing the existing infrastructure and existing applications and use it for new. So what I find a lot of organizations are doing is with that encapsulation of that heritage environment, they'll build a new, say, React application on the front end. That's a new system of engagement that accesses that heritage system of record. And they do that because they modernize it with that front end look and feel with React, but they use the existing system of record as the single source of truth. So it's a kind
Yep.
of a good way to kind of balance the old and new. But then they can process the information using AI and take those actionable insights appropriately. So that's an approach that I see a lot of organizations doing.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I like the 5 stages of an app. I'm not sure I caught them all, but I think that's pretty interesting. And we see all of those, everything from, containerized Kubernetes workloads to, virtual machines on the edge. And your data piece is interesting. It reminds me of one of our sort of examples. So Emerson is a process automation company. They're an OEM of ZEDEDA. And what they're doing is they're sort of bridging the OT IT gap in the way they work. So, their sensors and pumps and equipment gets deployed in like petrochemical factories, anywhere you're working with liquids, right? And they'll have 10,000 sensors in a particular factory that's producing, I don't know, COVID vaccine, for example. And what they're doing is they've sort of built a way to bridge, right? Because the OT networks, as I mentioned, like you need to be very careful with those. If you bring down a COVID manufacturing pipeline, like it has real implications on the planet or whatever else you're processing. So what they've done is they've developed this system where they run these really lightweight agents on the OT systems. And they have what's called a data diode, which is like a one-way path for data. A data diode is it basically physically makes it you can't send data back into the OT network. It can only extract out of the OT network. So they put these collectors on all these different OT systems, and they use these data diodes to, in effect, push it into an IT network where they're capturing it on an edge computing device, right? And that's where ZEDEDA runs, and we help power them that. And what that's done is, helped bridge that gap of it's still secure, my data is still on site, my OT network isn't being messed with. No one's going to push anything in and update a system and bring down my factory or anything along those lines, but they can still reliably collect this data. And the way they're doing that is using standards like OPC UA and other collection in virtual machines. And then they pump that into what you described, like a modern workflow, It has a data cache, data processing. There's an analytics engine. It can ingest Jupyter notebooks. They're using Grafana for visualization, and that's running literally right alongside this legacy. So they're bridging that gap and kind of bringing value to the user. And the use cases they can unlock are a lot. Like they're delivering some like packaged use cases, predictive maintenance, for example. But because the data is now available, the IT teams and the data scientists and the data analysts actually have real data instead of synthetic data to go build models against and bring new applications. And so we're really excited about that. That's really unlocking a lot of their sort of processing customers to sort of use data and bring AI to the edge in the early days.
Yeah, I mean, what I like about that use case is it allows for you basically driving down the road while you're changing the wheels on the bus, right? I mean, you basically can do things without impacting your core data sets. You can try different systems to access that information, but you're also keeping the real-time data kind of running as it needs to. So there's no like disruption of the overall flow. And to your point, in some mission critical environments, you don't want to have, you don't have the ability, you don't have the luxury to shut anything down. You have to keep it running. So this is a way that you can have those data streams being able to process by different applications, and then but the system is still running appropriately. So I like that approach, and I like the way you're describing it and how ZEDEDA does that.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, let's circle back to the cloud versus edge analogy again. I mean, I think kind of looking at what we just talked about and acceleration and these hourly releases and like fully automated CI/CD pipelines from developer to staging to maybe even production. I think part of why that's possible is all these services that the cloud companies have been building, right? So I touched on that a little bit on the front end, but the number of services, like I did some homework last year, and if you go to awsgeek.com, which I'm not sure is an official source, but has a list of all the services AWS offers, and there's hundreds of them, right? And I think that's really unlocked the cloud, and we're starting to see some of those emerge in the edge, and we can talk about some of those that we're seeing. But like, what's your take around the use of services and like what again, it kind of gets to that easy button again, but
Yeah.
as those are getting adopted, like what are you seeing changes when people do that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because when I think about services, it really does come down to acceleration of time to value, right? The application needs to have an acceleration time to value, but it also can't lose functionality. So if the organization is looking for increased functionality and feature sets, they have the ability to flip things on and off as needed, right? So going back to the conversation of challenges that CIOs face, right? When we ask about their challenges, we see that skill gap is an issue. Actually, we see that organizations are looking to hire generalists over specialists. Actually, 67% of respondents indicated that they want to hire generalists over specialists because they can't find those resources to get the job done. So, but the other side of it is when you look at the bench strength of these organizations and the accelerated modernization approach, if they don't have the resource, the human capital on board to do the work, they could either hire, which takes a little bit of time to bring people up to speed, or work with service delivery partners, right? And service delivery partners will help accelerate those processes. But more importantly, what I like about ZEDEDA is you've simplified the process to accelerate that time to value. So what I heard in our briefing, Maxey, was the fact that you can take those services and basically a la carte build the approach that the client's looking for and turn on the feature functionality that's needed. Now, acceleration of those projects means maybe you're sacrificing a little bit of feature functionality, but it's good enough to get you there for now. Or it gives you the ability to grow later as you want to bring on or onboard those services. So I like that approach of adding in as you need to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, we're relatively early in our services. I think we've been spending 4 years like hardening our platform, working with some of the biggest enterprises, difficult networks and security teams, and the services have started to evolve. And we announced a couple, last year, but they really did evolve out of customer examples. The first one I like is, we work with a lot of oil and gas customers, and we're at the well sites. And they have explosives. Like that's how they get in the ground, is they use explosives, right? And these sites are also very remote. So connectivity is LTE at best, maybe satellite. And they came to us and they're like, hey, our engineers are handling explosives and we need to turn off all of the radio antennas because, radio antennas can trigger explosives. But when we turn off the radio antenna, we no longer have connectivity to the edge node. So how do we turn it back on? Right. And, at the time, our system was fully cloud, right? So, we did what a good product team does, and we sort of brought back the problem and quickly sort of said, well, hey, here's an API, right? Here's an API your local guy can use to sort of turn off the radio. You can move your explosives, and then you turn on the radio again, and, hey, you're back functioning, right? And we sort of built that as, specifically for that customer, a tool to address radio. And, as you would expect, other requests came like, hey, when they move the computer, they plug the cables in a different order, right? And we're very sensitive to ports, like we lock down ports and it's very secure, so like, can you help us troubleshoot that? And what evolved over time is now what we call the local operator console, which evolved from like turn off my radio so people don't blow themselves up to like, how can I manage an edge node in an air-gapped environment, right? And this is like one of our services that we announced, it's been in production at a number of customers, been around for a while, but as I mentioned, it's sort of evolved over time. But like that, I think is, a good example of like, how do you help the existing applications run well? And that's maybe a little bit different than like the build services, which we'll talk about in a little bit later. But, our journey kind of started in that space of like, okay, customer needed something. They didn't want to blow themselves up. Like, how do you solve for that? And that's now evolved into a really nice air gap story for our company.
Yeah, you met the client where they were, right? And the customer needed to in a solution, you provided that solution, but you also it wasn't just a one-off thing. It was a product you productized. I mean, clearly you mentioned air gap, right? That is clearly a go-to-market for many companies for a number of reasons, right? But you can also apply that same logic to multiple industries like transportation or medical or mining or whatever it may be. You can apply it to those locations where you might not have direct connection all the time, so you have the ability to process the information and then upload as you need to, which is also incredibly important, right? Because it's again going back to that processing the data in place, using the application in place, fulfilling the need, and then reporting back to the core, which is important.
Definitely. Another example. So, we had a debug tool for our CS team, as you would expect, right? Like these devices get deployed in the middle of nowhere. There's no IT people to go plug in a USB or power cycle the machine. So, it needs to be up and running, and you need to be able to so our CS team had built this tool to kind of log in not only to the device, but into the applications, like obviously with our customers' consent using their creds and those sorts of things. But many of them were like, hey, that looks pretty useful. Right now I'm laying down a VPN infrastructure, or I'm dropping in a Bastion server, or opening up ports to the internet. And, how are you guys accessing these applications over an outbound HTTPS port? So, much like the local operator console, that evolved, right? It's now an edge access. We actually have a name for it. It's a service, and it kind of evolved into like a ZTNA solution, right? And we don't market it as such, but I think a pretty cool use case would be to like grab like, I don't know, an Uno or a Nook or even a Raspberry Pi, load up Eve on it for your home lab, and then like have one Eve node that's basically your gateway node, and then you could use this service for SSH access, or I don't know, you could get a Kubernetes connection or whatever you need into this. So it's sort of an interesting solution. Like we're not going into the ZTNA market. We're not going to go compete in that space. But, we've built a lot of functionality that looks like that. And again, sort of coming out of our customers saying, hey, that looks really useful. How do I get that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's also like fleet management. There's also the managing the sites without having technical bodies on site to do it. And that is, whether it's, ZEDEDA's core go to market, or if you're working within your partner ecosystem, it's you're enabling the ecosystem to have that functionality for where the client needs to get to. So if you want to partner up with somebody, or if the customer is already using something, you have the ability to have those calls and those hooks into those ways of kind of delivering that information out there. So I think it's important for the audience here to understand that, you know, you have that flexibility, you have the scalability of the solution, but it's not just monolithically focused on one particular thing. You actually work within your entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting pushed on all different areas, you know, and you know, we tend to break stuff because of our scale. So, you know, for example, you know, firewalls, most of our customers deploy a commercial firewall on their edge node. We have a great security story around the device and around software, but for the network side, you know, they want IDS and IPS, and you know, they have their favorite, you know, Fortinet or Palo Alto or whatever their commercial vendor is. So we see a lot of it. You know, it turns out when you deploy 10,000 of those, it's tricky to manage, right? And even some of the cloud consoles that the firewall vendors have built, like, struggle when the device comes on and off and on and off, which happens a lot in edge environments. So, you know, we ended up building, we haven't named it yet. So if you have any names, it's open. But we've built a utility that allows you really to push configuration to an application running on an edge node, not through a normal internet connection, but through our secure connection out. And, you know, with that, you know, we can manage, you know, tens of thousands of firewall rules at scale with distributed operations. And we built it in a way that, you know, it's not just for firewalls, like you can deliver like any blob of configuration. So it could be, I don't know, a new node red rule or a new app for that matter. So we need to name this thing. We don't quite have a name for it. It's in our product under a name that not everybody loves, but so it is real and working today. But this is a service that, you know, in the partner space, I'm super excited because often, you know, applications have a controller and they expect web connectivity. And when that's not there, it kind of limits some of the functionality of the partner applications. Firewalls, again, a great example. Like if you can't update the rules of the firewall, its value declines over time. So
Yeah.
our partners this path and this sort of really flexible tool to kind of update their configurations and change their rules or push new models or whatever it might be. That's a new one that we just announced. I'm really excited about. But all three of those, I think, live in, you know, making life easier for existing apps, right? But I want to pivot a little bit towards like building apps for the environment, which is kind of how cloud evolved and why you can do these hourly release cycles. And, you know, at the center of that, obviously, is, you know, the golden child of Kubernetes, right? So I know you guys have done a lot of research. You were at KubeCon last week. You know, talk to me a little bit about what you guys are seeing around Kubernetes on the edge, and then I'll share some of our customer experiences. But I think it'd be good to sort of riff on Kubernetes for a few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion about the messaging, testing on the naming, and maybe at our upcoming app field day we can have that conversation and reveal it to the audience here on what the naming will be. So I look forward to that. But on with Kubernetes at the edge, you know, it really is an evolution here, right? We used to, not too long ago, Kubernetes was just so much in its infancy that people were like, well, it's just trying to figure out how to do this in the cloud was good enough. And then now it's being used for a number of different reasons. So like when we're looking at the edge locations, it's about the ease of use of orchestration around your different types of edge devices as well, right? So you can have micro edge or full, you know, edge or whatever it may be. When, you know, and some people might call them IoT devices, but whatever it may be, the Kubernetes deployment is having the ability to do the management of the updates for those applications, those containerizations, and the microservices allow you to do the quick updates for the individual devices that are out there in your edge location. The other thing about Kubernetes is the ability to do rapid acceleration of data sets. So you can basically take that information and then process it very quickly based on scaling up and scaling down the containers and the applications within the pods. So Kubernetes, that's what we're seeing in our research. We also, surprisingly, we're seeing that in the next 2 to 3 years, we're seeing the growth of worldwide edge location applications going from 500 to 1,000 applications at the edge location. So it's just a significant amount of development that's happening for these applications. And that is mainly due to, I mentioned the term micro edge, but it's mainly due to the individual devices that are out there. There's an application that may be running on each one of those, and you cannot build a traditional application and that scale for the where the market is going. So this Kubernetes kind of approach gives you the ability to deploy, and you mentioned the way to even remotely deploy applications. That's incredibly powerful as well.
Interesting. Yeah. So just to make sure I caught that, did you say from 500 to 1,000, like doubling the number of apps?
Yeah, 500 to 1,000. That's what organizations are expecting to have applications running at the edge locations worldwide.
Yeah, that's an interesting trend. We like that. I mean, we see a fair amount of that. I think, our sweet spot tends to be multiple apps. We run on, as you mentioned, like edge hardware, which can be, big beefy Intel servers with GPUs, or it could be Raspberry Pis or everything in the middle. But our customers have embraced Kubernetes really from day one. So we've been, deploying Kubernetes, really a lot of K3s and some of the smaller tiny Tanzu, some of the smaller distributions, at scale. So tens of thousands of locations, which it wasn't really built for. If you think about when Google built and released Kubernetes, it was for a big giant data center that you could carve up into little logical containers, not thousands of small little tiny data centers. So, it's been a fun journey. Let's open it up like that. I think we've been working with our partners. We have great partnerships with Rancher and Rafe and a lot of the orchestrators around how do we scale, and how do you address 10,000 clusters that come on offline every once in a while. And so we've really been on that journey, and I think we've learned a lot in that space. Our customers have learned a lot in that space. So what's evolved over time, and this is sort of, the first service I would say is like you can build on instead of like helping the existing applications is, we announced a Kubernetes service at the last KubeCon back in Chicago. I think we talked about it then. But that, to me is I'm really excited about that service, not just because the Kubernetes magic and pixie dust, but it's real. Customers are using it. And they asked us to, they don't want to maintain it. They don't want to patch it. They don't want to qualify it. They want to consume it like they do in the cloud, right? They use EKS or GKS. So we've, introduced a Kubernetes managed service, very similar to runtime that they can sort of spin up really quickly. And, that's the first of sort of our build services that I'm really excited about. And we've seen pretty good interest in that. It's not just Kubernetes though. Like to your point, we're still seeing the legacy that runs alongside of it, and a lot of the data processing happening in these containers. And so it's interesting how this world's evolving, like back to that whole cloud, on tiny devices you own.
Absolutely, Maxey. And I'll throw one little hook in here as well. It's we talked about heritage, we talked about current states. There's also the future state, right? I mean, there's the next generation that the people are looking at, which may be something to consider as well. And going to throw it out there that WebAssembly is definitely an area that is a WASM, to so to speak, is a way that you can build your applications and then use it across different infrastructures in the area. So I can see that being and you use the word evolution. I agree. This has been an evolution. This whole thing, this journey has been an incredible evolution over time.
Definitely. Yeah. And WASM's super interesting. I think the portability it brings is, not this for that, but it reminds me of Java in the early days in terms of some of the portability and capabilities. Not that everybody loves Java. But okay, cool. Let's pivot a little bit. I mean, we couldn't have a discussion without talking about AI, right? I think like from an edge perspective, we're seeing a lot of interest in it. It kind of falls into really kind of two buckets. We have customers that have been doing it forever. It's probably called advanced analytics 10 years ago, but now it's really AI, where they're truly using GPUs to analyze data and give insight on the edge to operators so they can, I don't know, better produce, products or extract more oil from the ground, et cetera. So we have a bucket that are really mature. They've largely built them themselves with data scientists using some open tools, and are, starting to ask and look at, some of the systems out there that make this a lot easier. There's a lot of MLOps workflow tools and full model management around the edge that's really matured over the last couple of years. So we have that group of customers that are like, okay, like, how do I make it easier? And then we have another group of customers that are like, okay, what is it and what should we be doing, right? And that one, we talk a lot about sort of data, and you touched on this earlier, like you can't do AI without data, and you need to make sure your data is there and prepped and tagged and understandable and ideally used to train the model, and some sort of feedback loop against it. So, we kind of see two camps on the edge when it comes to AI. But, as I mentioned, there's a lot of really interesting startups, a lot of technology going on. We're doing some stuff internally as well. Like, what's your take on edge AI, and is it showing up in your discussions?
Yeah, it is. And this is an area that's continuously evolving, and it is real time. Data is changing all the time, right? So I recently ran a survey to find out, get a pulse of the market of what's happening. And we find that 18% of organizations are using AI in their production environments, and 27% of the respondents for this survey indicated that they were in evaluation mode, like they're trying to figure it out, right? They're trying to understand what it is that it can add value. So, but looking at AI, the top use cases for applications and verticals, retail, financial impacts, these are edge cases. Healthcare is another one that comes up very frequently. And then I recently I did an interview with a company that did AI processing of counting. So like think of it in the context of like an auction or a cattle farm or whatever it may be. They're using AI to track all the individual pieces, but all that data that's an edge scenario, right? That's happening at the edge, and then that information is being processed back. And it was interesting to watch the real life use case come to life, because this technology did the scanning I'll think of the auction one. Previously, just a year earlier, they had a person sitting there with a clicker, like counting the devices going through, or it was the cows going through. They were counting the cows going through, and they lost count, and they basically over provisioned, so to speak. They gave too much away as part of the auction. So this way, it really helps with giving the best value for the dollars, because you can accurately count. The other main thing that I see with AI at the edge is smart cities, right? We're seeing this a lot in computer vision, right? Specifically around crime and crime protection. What we're seeing, one particular use case was to show the compression of somebody's shoe, right? And articulating exactly the height and the weight of that individual, because they could see the compression of their shoe, which I thought was amazing, right? Because if somebody's running out of a store and they can see exactly who it is, they can get the characteristics of height and weight, which is pretty amazing. So needless to say, lots happening at the edge, lots of real-time, fast-moving data is happening at the edge, and the only way to process that information at the edge is with AI. Right, because if you're trying to do it manually, you're not going to be able to keep up, right? You're just not going to be able to keep up. So you're at risk of either being in a competitive disadvantage, or just not being relevant anymore.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, like where that processing happens. My brother is a bird nerd. He loves birds. And so for Christmas, I actually bought one for myself because I thought it was cool. This product called a Bird Buddy, which is a bird feeder with a camera. And they made the trade-off. Like, so their choice was like, do I display in real time the bird at the camera, right? Like, oh, you got a bird, like log in and you can see it real time in your backyard. They chose not to do that. What they did instead is they actually shoot a video of it. They upload it to the cloud, and then they run AI against it to identify the bird and like choose the best photo frame of the bird. And then like they can identify, like, have you seen it before, and this sort of thing. And then they push it down to your phone. So they've sort of given up that real-time experience to bring more value, which I think is great, because I don't know birds, and a finch is a finch, I guess. But that's one use case that I think they've made that choice. Now, would I rather have real-time bird labeling and viewing? Yeah, probably. But this solution, I think, worked well. And then the other extreme is we were talking with like a partner / prospect of ours that's doing large language models on a single device for either government conversations that have to be recorded but are extremely private, or doctors' offices, right? And that is completely offline. There is no internet, there is no connectivity. The large language model was trained in the cloud, but brought to this device, lives on that device, and the data never leaves the premises, let alone goes to the cloud. And they're doing it in real time on the edge. So it's different. It's interesting to watch these different models emerge, and like the trade-offs companies make against sort of, do I process locally or not?
Yeah, agreed, agreed. And again, it comes directly down to the use case and what's needed for that business. The nice thing about it is solutions like yours, you have the ability to customize them to fit the need. And that's really what we're seeing against the data. It's identifying what exactly it is that you're trying to achieve and how do you get there? What's the right tech stack to get you there?
Got it. Cool. Let's see. Let's see if we got any questions. Here's one for you. Okay, and I'm going to throw this to you. What are the biggest barriers to a wider industry adoption of Kubernetes at the edge?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thank you for asking that one. The question, really when you look at the modernization approach, I mentioned that kind of maturity model of applications. And when you look at the adoption of Kubernetes at the edge, it really does require those applications to be in a state where Kubernetes can be best leveraged. Okay, so if you're, and I mentioned 5 stages. I said heritage, siloed applications that may, and then the second stage would be maybe a virtualizer or VM application, and then the third stage in my model would be a fat container. Okay, so when you look at 3, 4, and 5, those stages of 3, 4, and 5, that's really where Kubernetes is going to shine. Right? The ability to do orchestration across the environment, making sure that you have that harmonization across your tech stack and your solution. That's where, if the application lives within that maturity of fat containers, cloud native, or fully elastic cloud solutions using microservices and containerization, that's where Kubernetes is going to really excel. If you have an edge environment that's in the heritage stage of 1 and 2, it's going to be much more difficult to leverage an orchestration like Kubernetes platform out there in the edge.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And we support both, so you can kind of mature when you're ready. I agree on I like your model. The once it's fat container and all the way to, I think you call it micro container or something to that effect. I think that's an interesting spectrum. And to your point, yeah, Kubernetes or even Docker at that point is a pretty good answer for a lot of those. Awesome. Well, hey, I really appreciate the time. This is a great conversation. Any last comments? Anything you want to pitch? Any feedback on the session you want to close with?
Well, Maxey, thank you for having me, and thank you to the audience for attending. This has been a great session. It's a very exciting time at the edge. Really, it is. We're seeing, like you mentioned, I just came off KubeCon last week, and it was a lot of solutions that are driving processing information in location, driving those results in location. And by doing so, that is a key factor to the topic of this conversation here, as well as how to look forward to where you want to go next with your solution. So I think it's important to keep it relevant and adapt to your business needs, but don't go on your heels and wait for things that come to you, because the market is changing very rapidly.
Awesome. Well, hey, great conversation. Really appreciate the time. Thank you to all the viewers. Give us a like, follow us on YouTube, check out ZEDEDA.com, and we really appreciate the time, everybody showing up. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.